His best friend warned me, "You'll never survive without him." I smiled not because I thought he was wrong, but because I already knew. 1 year later, when they saw my name on Forbes, they couldn't believe it. "Where in the world are you watching this from, and what time is it?" I don't ask because I care about the hour, but because it's important. You're watching this, and maybe, just maybe, you're a little like me, trying to understand the line between survival and destruction, between breaking and becoming. It's strange how time shapes us, how it bends and breaks us in ways we never expect, how a single moment can redefine everything. I know you're curious. You want to know what happened, how I got from there to here, how I became someone they all doubted. But let me start from the beginning. I wasn't always the woman who would sit in front of a camera, telling you this story. I wasn't always the one people would look at and wonder, how did she do it? No, I was someone else back then, and she was fragile. I think it's hard for people to understand that, the fragility of someone who has been hurt in ways they can't even explain. For a long time, I didn't know who I was. All I knew was that I was fighting for breath in a world that kept pushing me to be something I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be my mother's disappointment, her lost dream. I didn't want to be the broken piece of a puzzle that didn't fit anywhere. But there I was. She told me once, in that cold, dismissive way she had, "You'll never be what they expect of you." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear apart every single word she'd ever said, but I couldn't. Because deep down I knew she was right. I couldn't escape her shadow. I couldn't outrun the expectations that hovered over me like some suffocating storm cloud. She wanted me to be perfect, to be everything she wasn't. I was the answer to all the things she felt she had failed at, the embodiment of her idealized future. But I wasn't perfect. I was a mess. My father was never there. Not really. He existed in the same house, his presence a distant shadow. I remember those nights when I was young, lying in bed, hearing him shout from the other room, angry, frustrated, as if he couldn't figure out why life didn't give him what he wanted. I wanted to scream at him too, to ask why he had to destroy the little bit of peace I had inside. But instead I curled up in the corner, hugged my knees to my chest, and pretended I was invisible. I learned early on that silence was the safest place. The quieter I was, the less I drew attention, the less I had to be the answer to anything. Then there was him, Jason. At first he seemed like a lifeline, a way out of the chaos. We were different, yet we fit together in a way that felt almost too good to be true. He saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He pushed me to take risks, to reach for things I never thought I could touch. But like everything in my life, it wasn't real. At least not in the way I wanted it to be. When Jason said I wouldn't survive without him, I knew he was wrong. But I also knew I wasn't ready to let go of him just yet. He was the first person who ever told me that I was capable of more than just surviving. And in a way, I guess I needed that. I needed someone to believe in me, even if it was just for a little while. He had his flaws, though. That's what no one tells you about the people who come into your life to save you. They're broken too. Jason was a mess in his own way. His best friend, Mark, hated me. Or maybe he just hated that Jason had found something else to care about. Someone who wasn't him. And Mark was always right there, standing in the background, warning me. "You're making a mistake," he'd say, his eyes always full of judgment. But I couldn't stop. I was drawn to Jason, drawn to the idea of being more than the girl I had been for so many years. But nothing lasts forever. Nothing ever stays in place. One night, after the world had been spinning out of control for weeks, I found myself standing alone in an empty apartment, the silence too loud in my ears. Jason was gone. Just like that. No warning, no explanation. He left a note, but it wasn't the words that hurt. It was the finality of it. Like he was just another person who decided I wasn't worth the fight. I wasn't worth saving. I didn't know what to do. The life I had built around him, the one that had given me a glimpse of something better, crumbled in a single breath. My mother didn't care. She never did. My father wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. So I stood in the middle of that empty apartment, staring at the walls that had witnessed my hopes, my dreams, my failures, and I realized that I had nothing left to lose. Nothing but the anger that burned deep inside me. A year passed and everything changed. The pain I had felt, the loss I had carried, it all transformed. I didn't need Jason. I didn't need anyone. But I wasn't going to let this world break me either. No one was going to look at me and think I was weak, that I couldn't rise from the ashes like they expected me to. And I did. But not the way anyone thought. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them see me for what I truly was. It was about something else. Something deeper. Something that made the rest of them tremble without me even having to say a word. But you'll have to wait for that. Because this is just the beginning. There was a text. A single message. It's not over. That was all it said. And in that moment my heart raced. Because I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The text message stared back at me. It's not over. My fingers hovered over the screen, my breath catching in my throat as I tried to grasp what it meant. There was no name, no number, just that phrase, but it felt like a warning or maybe even an invitation. I wasn't sure anymore. The world I thought I knew, the life I had built, was crumbling around me piece by piece. My mind raced as I tried to remember if I had ever been truly in control. Was it all an illusion? Was I just a puppet being pulled along by strings I couldn't even see? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. More wrong than I had ever known. Jason's absence didn't hurt like it used to. I had gotten past the pain, the loneliness, the betrayal. Or so I thought. But now, with that message, something else began to surface. A crack in my armor. I thought I had been moving forward, building a life. But the truth was, I was still stuck, haunted by things I didn't understand. Things I had never even thought to question. And now I was beginning to see the edges of something dark, something I had never expected. The next day I ran into Mark. I hadn't seen him in months. He was always lurking in the background, never quite leaving Jason's side. Always there with his sharp words and his even sharper gaze. I thought I hated him once for the way he looked at me, for the way he talked about Jason like he knew him better than I ever could. But now, standing in front of him, I realized I didn't hate him. I was terrified of him. Did you get my message? He asked, his voice low, controlled. There was something in his eyes, something that made my skin crawl. Part of me wanted to run, to leave, but I couldn't. I needed answers, and he seemed to be the only one who could give them to me. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to convince myself as much as him. But the words felt like a lie. I could see the flicker of something in his eyes, something that told me he knew exactly what was happening. You know, you're playing a dangerous game, he said, stepping closer, his tone almost pitying. You think you're in control, but you're not. Not yet. Not until you understand everything. I wanted to yell at him, to tell him to get out of my life, but there was something about him, something that made me freeze. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them, like he knew more about me than I did myself. Later that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what he said, about how he seemed to know so much about me, about my life, my choices. It felt like everything I had worked for was built on a lie. I thought I was done with Jason, done with the past, but something was pulling me back in. I had to know what it was. I started going through old photos, old letters, pieces of my past that I had forgotten. It wasn't just Jason. It was everyone. My mother, my father, Mark. It was like I was peeling back the layers of a life that wasn't mine. A life that had been manipulated, twisted. I found a letter from years ago, one I had never seen before. It was addressed to my mother from a lawyer. It had been sitting at the bottom of a drawer, buried under other forgotten papers. I didn't know what it said at first, the words were blurry, faded with age. But as I read through it, something clicked. The letter spoke of a trust, a fortune, something my mother had hidden from me. I couldn't breathe. I felt sick. My mother, the woman who had always told me I wasn't enough, that I would never live up to her expectations, had been hiding something, something huge, something that could have changed everything for me. But why? Why hadn't she ever told me? What was she protecting? I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands, and I realized I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what was real and what wasn't. The more I uncovered, the more I felt like I was being pulled deeper into a web of lies. My mother's silence, Jason's betrayal, Mark's cryptic warnings. It was all starting to make sense, but in the worst way possible. I had been a pawn in someone else's game, and I had no idea how deep the game really went. I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't close my eyes without feeling like I was drowning in everything I didn't understand. My thoughts swirled, each one darker than the last. I was in a storm of my own making, and I wasn't sure if I would survive it. I thought I knew who I was. I thought I knew what had happened. But the truth? The truth was darker than I ever could have imagined. And then the message came again. Another one. It's time to find out the truth. All of it. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Was it Mark? Was it Jason? Or was it someone else? Someone I hadn't even considered? Someone who had been watching me all along? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall and forget this whole mess, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew. I knew that this was just the beginning. And just as I felt the weight of the message settle in, I saw something else. A name. My mother's name, written in a familiar handwriting, scrawled on a piece of paper left carelessly on the floor. It was a letter, one she had never shown me. I picked it up, hands shaking, and as I unfolded it, the words hit me like a punch in the gut. It wasn't a letter from her at all. It was a letter from Jason. The letter from Jason felt like a weight in my hands, something I could barely hold. The words were clear, but my mind was too fogged to take them in at first. The letter wasn't a confession, not exactly. It was a directive, a roadmap for what came next. The last few months of my life, the betrayals, the lies had all been leading to this moment. I realized with a sinking, horrifying clarity that nothing about this had been accidental. Jason hadn't just left me. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had planned it all. He had watched me, waited for the perfect time to pull away, to let me think I was free. The truth hit me like a slap. I had been the pawn in his game, and I had never even known the rules. It was always about control, always about power. But why? Why did he choose me for this twisted game? And why had I never seen it coming? I'd given him everything, love, loyalty, trust, and all of it had been nothing. More than a calculated move for him. I spent the night staring at that letter, my hands shaking, my thoughts running in circles trying to make sense of it all. But it wasn't just the letter. It was everything that had been building up to this. Mark's warnings. The strange silences in my mother's voice when she thought I wasn't listening. The way she'd always put me down, told me I would never live up to expectations. Maybe she'd known all along. Maybe she was in on it too. Maybe that's why she had always kept me at arm's length. I realized now that I had been nothing more than a tool in their hands, a piece in their game. I thought I was working for success, for independence, but all I'd been doing was following their plan. I was a product, a pawn, and now I was just a broken woman who was starting to put the pieces back together. Only this time I wasn't going to be the one left in the dust. I threw the letter aside and stood up. My mind had shifted, in a way that terrified me and exhilarated me all at once. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival. This was about reclaiming what was mine, about taking back control from the people who had stripped me of it for so long. My hands felt cold, but my heart was starting to burn with something new. Not the anger I thought I would feel, but a deep, empty kind of calm. I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't afraid anymore. The next few days passed in a blur of careful planning. I couldn't trust anyone. Not Mark, not my mother, not even the friends I had thought I could rely on. They were all pieces in the game too. Each one of them had been playing their part without me even realizing. I started asking questions, digging into things I had never questioned before. I went through every email, every text message, every conversation I'd ever had with Jason, with my mother, with Mark. And the more I dug, the more I saw the connections, the manipulations, the lies. It was like they had all been waiting for me to wake up to it, waiting for the moment when I would finally understand what they had done to me. But now I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. I confronted my mother first. The conversation didn't go the way I thought it would. I thought I would be angry, yelling, demanding answers. But when I saw the way she looked at me, pity, maybe even regret, I realized how much she had known all along. The truth hit me in waves, drowning me in confusion and rage. She confessed. Slowly, methodically, she told me how Jason had been planning everything from the start, how he had manipulated her into playing her part. She wasn't the victim I had always imagined her to be. She wasn't the loving, caring mother I had built up in my mind. She was just as complicit as everyone else. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was listen, numb to everything but the sound of her voice, telling me everything I had feared, but never fully believed. By the time I left the house that day, I had one goal in mind, to take back what was mine. I wasn't sure how, but I knew it would involve Jason. I couldn't let him get away with this. He had used me, and now I would make him pay. But there was something else stirring in me, something darker than just the need for revenge. It wasn't enough to simply hurt him back. I wanted to make him see what it felt like to lose control, to be the one who was powerless. I wanted him to feel the same sense of betrayal, the same suffocating weight that had crushed me for so long. It wasn't until I found the hidden phone, the one Jason had been using to communicate with Mark, the one he thought I would never find, that everything started to fall into place. The messages, the plans, the quiet instructions, they were all there. He thought I was too naive to see it, too lost in the idea of who he was to understand the truth. But now I knew. And with every message I read, every secret I uncovered, the fire inside me grew hotter. I was no longer the woman I had been. I was something else. Something colder. Stronger. The next confrontation came quickly, unexpectedly. It was Mark, of course, who thought he could stop me. He thought he could keep me under control, keep me from digging too deep. But he underestimated me. Underestimated how much I had changed. The moment he tried to warn me again, to play his usual mind games, I realized that he wasn't my ally. He wasn't a friend. He was another piece on the board, another pawn in Jason's game. And just like everyone else, he was about to be discarded. "I know everything, Mark," I said quietly, looking at him with cold eyes. "And I don't need you anymore." His face paled. For a split second, I saw fear in his eyes. He knew I meant it. He knew the game was over for him too. And that's when I stopped being afraid. I stood there, watching Mark's face twist into something that wasn't fear anymore, but something darker, something more familiar. It was the face of a man who knew his lies were about to come to light. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this had never been about them. It had never been about me getting some kind of satisfaction or revenge. It had never been about me making them feel what I felt, all that rage, that frustration. No, it was always about something else. It was about power. I had spent so long living in their shadow, drowning in their expectations, following their rules, but now I wasn't following anyone. Now I was the one pulling the strings. I walked away from Mark without another word, the weight of everything I'd uncovered finally settling on my shoulders like a cloak of finality. The night Jason came back was the night everything changed. I'd planned it down to the smallest detail. I had known for months exactly what he would do when he returned, come crawling back, thinking he could talk his way out of this, that his charm would work on me again. The only thing he didn't know was that I wasn't the same person who had left the door open for him all those years ago. I had become something sharper, colder, someone who didn't trust their own heart anymore, but who trusted the game I was playing. When I opened the door, his eyes immediately met mine, that look of relief crossing his face before he masked it with his usual smile. But I didn't smile back. I didn't move. I just stood there looking at him, knowing how this was going to end. "You came back," I said, my voice calm, too calm. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the same confusion I had felt so many times before, the same confusion that had led me to believe him, to trust him. "You honestly thought I'd just forget everything?" He tried to speak, but I silenced him with one hand raised. "No. This ends tonight. And not on your terms." The rest happened quickly, but it wasn't fast enough to erase the satisfaction that flooded my veins. He tried to play the victim, tried to explain, but it was too late. I already knew everything. I knew about the lies he'd told me, about the things he'd hidden, about the way he'd planned this all along. But there was one thing he didn't expect, one thing I hadn't even expected until that moment. I wasn't going to let him live in the lie anymore. I didn't want him to die, but I wanted him to suffer, the same way he had made me suffer. It wasn't about a moment of rage anymore. It was cold. It was deliberate. I had nothing left for him but the truth of what he had done. And when I finally said those words, the words that exposed him completely, I could see his face fall for the first time in years. And for a split second, I saw the man he truly was, not the person I had loved, but the person he had always been, a fraud. A liar. A man who had manipulated everyone around him. "You should have never come back," I whispered. And as the words left my lips, I realized that I wasn't just saying them to him. I was saying them to myself. I had spent so long trying to understand why he'd done this to me, trying to understand why I had been the one left broken. But now I knew. It wasn't about me. It was about him. And now that I understood that, I was finally free. I thought the satisfaction of seeing him crumble would feel better, but it didn't. There was no joy in it. There was no closure. Just emptiness. The truth had always been there, waiting for me to see it, but once it was laid bare, there was nothing left. The game was over. I didn't have to keep fighting anymore. I stood there in the silence, the space between us thick with everything we had been through, and for a moment I thought I might break. But I didn't. Instead, I turned my back on him. I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't stand to see his face, the face of someone I had trusted, someone who had shattered me without ever truly caring. And I walked away. I don't know how long I wandered, or what exactly led me to the place where everything finally ended. But when I found it, the old house, the place I had once called home, the place where all the lies began, I knew I had come full circle. It was there, in that space where the past had bled into the present, where the whispers of who I had been and who I was now collided, that I realized something. It wasn't over. It would never be over. I had won. I had taken back everything they had stolen from me, but the cost was something I hadn't anticipated. The moment I thought I could walk away and leave it all behind, I realized that I had become a part of this game. And just like them, I had played my role too. As I stood in the doorway looking at the empty house, I felt something shift inside me. Something deep and dark. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was acceptance. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the hero. I was something in between. Something broken, something rebuilt, something that had learned the hard way what it meant to survive. The world had twisted me, had made me into something I didn't recognize, but now I knew. I wasn't going to let it break me again. Not now. Not ever. And as I turned to leave, my hand brushed against something cold. A letter. I stopped. I looked down, and for a moment my heart stopped. It was from Jason. But this time it wasn't what he had written that mattered. It was what he hadn't. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't begged. There was no redemption in his words, just another lie, another game. I folded the letter slowly, and with one final look at the house that had shaped me, I turned and walked away. The sound of the door clicking shut behind me echoed in the night, and for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me. Something new. Something stronger. And if you stayed this long, you already know this wasn't just a story. This was a warning. Subscribe. And remember me.